All right. Hello there. The time has come again. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to you, whoever you are, especially if you're new. Thanks to all of my returning friends. How is everyone doing this week? Did you make it through the holiday? I'm back home. I'm back in PA. And man, news this week. News. First, let me take a moment to express my condolences for the loss of Mati Ezraty. I'm sure many of you listening already know, but just in case you didn't, Mati Ezraty passed away suddenly out of nowhere. There's not a lot of information. She was in Tokyo. I saw a post from someone who was with her the day before saying that there was no indication of anything being wrong. She was her usual self. And the police report said that she died in her sleep. We don't know the cause of death, but to just die in your sleep at age 55, wow. I know it sent shudders down the spines of the yoga world. Did mine. I'm 47, you know? And I think I have a dual response. One is a fear, feeling gripped by a fear, but the other is this impulse to want to cherish. Because it's really fleeting, incredibly fleeting. I mean, we really could go at any second, any of us. Like brain aneurysms happen all the time, you know? It's like it could happen to any of us at any moment. And that truth, that fact, makes me want to appreciate that I am here and having these moments all the more. I never got to meet Mati. I never got to practice with her. I had hoped to have a chance to talk with her on this show at some point. I always had it in mind that at some point that would happen, but no, it won't. But to any of you who knew her and were touched by her, I think she was such an important person in the evolution of yoga in the West, and I know she will be missed. Also, I just feel like it should be reported just in case you didn't hear about it, but Sharat Joyce made a public acknowledgement that his grandfather, Pattabhi Joyce, was a sexual abuser. That has never happened before. Of course, this happens after the website got completely changed. Actually, there's no official Ashtanga website, or there's a couple of Ashtanga websites, but it's now SharatJoyceYoga.com. And on SharatJoyceYoga.com, there's no pictures of Pattabhi Joyce or mentions of him. It's like they did a rebrand, you know? And it should also be mentioned that this statement comes after years at this point of people tirelessly speaking out. Karen Rain, Annika Lucas, Jubilee Cook, these people have been out there saying that this is what's needed for healing, and it has gone unheard. And when it finally does come, it comes in the form of an Instagram post. To me, that was mind-blowing. Like, I saw someone mentioning it. I saw someone saying, Sharat Joyce made a statement. And I was like, really? So I went to the website to look for it, like maybe as a blog post, or I thought maybe it would be there. I couldn't find it anywhere on a website or anywhere. After doing considerable searching, I found the Instagram post, because I'm not really on social media so much these days, but it was an Instagram post. And it had problems with it, let's just say that. But it was an acknowledgement, which had never happened before. And I should mention, in coincidence, it just so happens that 2 weeks from now, I will be bringing you a conversation I recorded with Guy Donahue. If you don't know who Guy is, he is the co-author of the book entitled Guruji. He's put out a series of blog posts of late that I think are quite scathing and pointed and important. And if you haven't read them, I would encourage you to go read them. But I recorded with him a few weeks ago, and I'm going to play that for you in 2 weeks. Not next week, but the week after. And it's a significant and important conversation, so just to take note. But wow, the paradigm continues to shift under our feet. I think we better maintain a center of gravity from within. Also, on a personal note, just because I know a number of you have reached out and been asking, I want to give you a Goldie report. Goldie the goldfish is doing okay. I'm happy to tell you that Goldie is doing okay. We're still in a process of healing. The tank is still cycling through. I met a fantastic person at the Petco. He had a lot of information. He helped me figure out what happened and why. I really did screw up a little bit. I didn't use enough of the tank water, and I think I shocked her. And then the other water that I put in there was the water that I thought was problematic, so I ended up redoing the tank water. I took all the bacteria out of there, so I really didn't do... I did a lot of things that were not necessarily the right thing to do, and I did almost kill our pet goldfish, but I rerouted, and Goldie is doing fine. And I was just down there a little while ago, and she's still not eating as much as she used to, which, I think about when I'm sick. I don't eat as much either, but she's eating, and she's behaving more like she used to. She's doing some of the things that she used to do and acting like her old self again. And I think we're going to be okay. I'm still really looking for we haven't had a full recovery, but so far so good. Goldie the goldfish is doing okay. I didn't kill the fish. At least, let me knock on some wood. Okay. Goldie's fine, everybody. Thank you for asking. Also, one other thing I wanted to mention on a personal note. I just want to thank those of you who reached out and expressed some support to me regarding the new podcast premium subscription. I talked about that last week if you weren't here, and what it is and why we're doing it. And there were some moments where I was expressing, my concerns. I've got baggage and issues around money. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I just wanted to thank you guys for those notes of support. I really do appreciate it. And if you weren't here last week, do check it out. We created this podcast premium service. You get full access to the archives, and it's also a way to be a part of supporting the show. We have a pricing structure there. You can check it out. It's a choose your own rate, and if you really can't afford it, let us know. We'll give you a free account. I am hoping that those of you out there who are listening every week and getting stuff from the show and value the fact that this is happening every week will also express that through becoming a premium subscriber. It really is the best way for you to help me ensure that this can keep going in the way that I feel like it needs to. So for whatever that's worth too, please go check it out. Go to jbrownyoga.com/premium. That's jbrownyoga.com/premium. Okay, let me tell you about today's talk with Ida Jo. Ida Jo reached out to me to let me know about this project she's working on about the women in yoga, specifically around the Gauche yoga tradition. She has been working alongside Jerome Armstrong, who was on the show not too long ago. We talked all about his book, Calcutta Yoga, and Buddha Bose, and Bishnu Ghosh, and the Gauche Yoga School. And she has picked up that thread some too, and is looking at some of the untold stories of women yogis in history that we haven't heard of, but who were there. And in learning about her project, I also found out that we had a lot of things in common. She's a musician and an artist. So we touched base on a lot of that and just some practice stuff, as well as this cool project that she's doing. So I really enjoyed connecting with her. I think it's a very engaging conversation, and I'm very happy to be sharing it with you today. Before we do, let me mention today's sponsor, Yogic Studies, which absolutely relates. If you're into this kind of inquiry into the history and philosophies of yoga, and you want to know more about where stuff comes from, how we got to it, maybe you want to know more about the texts, maybe you want to learn about Sanskrit, well, today's sponsor, Yogic Studies, is the perfect place to go to for that. Seth Powell, the founder of Yogic Studies, has been on the show before. Go back and listen. He's a talented teacher. He has a way of making these things accessible. I have personally taken his History and Philosophies course. I talked all about it in the past. I learned a lot from him. I really highly recommend it. And as a listener of the show, you can get 15% off if you use promo code JBrown15, all capital letters. That's all capital letters, JBrown15, and you can get 15% off all the courses there. Go to yogicstudies.com. All right. Other than that, I think we're good. I will touch base with you on the other side. We'll talk about who's coming on next week and maybe a few other things. But for now, let's get to it. Let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Ida Jo.
Hello?
Hello, is this Ida Jo?
Yes, hi.
Hi, Ida.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Is it Ida, or should I say Ida Jo? Is that
No, Ida's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for taking the time.
No, I was just going to say the same thing to you. I really appreciate it. I appreciate getting your email, and I took like a look at that video for the project you're working on. I was very intrigued by it.
Good.
So
Awesome.
I'm excited to get a chance to chat with you some today.
Yeah, me as well. I've worked with Jerome, and I think you and Jerome Armstrong did a podcast, I guess it was a while back now. But I listened to that, and I've listened to a couple other of the ones that you've done. So it's really cool to have yoga being covered in podcast form.
Cool. Well, yes, I really appreciated that conversation I had with Jerome.
Yeah.
Because, Gauche yoga was a real kind of blind spot in my, knowledge of the history of yoga. And I think for a lot of other people who listen to it. So it was very cool for us to cover some of that territory. And I know you're very affiliated with the school. Yeah. So I kind of want to have some conversation with you about that as well as your project.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever. It's all kind of linked together. So, wherever the conversation goes is good. It all supports the other things. So
cool. Well, the other thing that I wanted to say right off the bat is I wanted to let you know that you have a new fan in my eldest daughter.
Oh, nice.
You see, my eldest daughter is 9, and she has taken interest in playing viola.
Very cool.
And
nice.
And, I don't know why she picked that instrument, but she did. And she really, was really practicing a lot for school. And, so we actually got her like a private tutor this summer to keep it going.
Oh, nice.
And
that's great.
So getting ready to talk to you, I was like looking around about you and saw this video of you like doing this performance on stage.
Yep.
My daughter happened to be sitting there and she's like, "What's that?" I was like, "That's this person I'm going to talk to today. Her name's Ida Jo. She's also a musician, I see."
Yep.
And she was so into it.
Oh, that's so sweet. I love hearing that.
Well, because you were cool and kind of rock and roll.
Yeah.
and you could sing good, and then you also were playing the violin.
Yep.
And she's like, "That's awesome!" And you were starting out that one song by like plucking, and she does that too.
Oh, cool.
So, anyways,
that's
you won her
awesome.
over. It was really cool to have that little moment with her. And I'm curious, Liz, like, was music your thing before yoga, or did they happen the same, or do you still do? Is music still something you're doing?
Well, it is something I'm doing still. But the last few years have been so busy with yoga that it's a bit of just a balancing act to do both. But yeah, music has been my life for the most part, up until I got really into this yoga stuff. But I started violin when I was a little kid, and I studied music, and I love music, and it's really, it's a big passion of mine for sure. And you know, it's interesting. They really, like, for me, the yoga informs my relationship to music so much. Mm-hmm. And so it's a cool combination of the two.
Well, I know that before I got into yoga, I did music for a little while. I was never all that steady, but I was like a bass player in different bands and kind of toured some. And it was actually a moment where it was like a Wednesday night, and we had played like this really late night show to like the sound guy. And I like had to teach a class early the next morning. And I was like, fuck this noise. I'm done with this. And I just stopped. I still play, but that was already that. I was like, I'm going the yoga way. Yoga makes me feel like I'm going in a direction I want to go. And this music thing's a grind, you know?
Oh my gosh. I totally agree. I had a similar situation a couple years ago too, which kind of like made me focus on yoga more for a while, because it's, you know, same story. Just, it's like, you're out late. They're like, we can't pay you, but here's a bunch of beer. And you're like, no, thanks. I mean, like, that's okay. Yeah. You have to teach early. You're trying to like live a little bit of a cleaner lifestyle. And it's like, wow.
Yeah, I know. So at some point, it's still a love, I'm sure. And I still get a lot of joy, like from picking up a bass guitar or music in general. But as to where you're going to put your energies as you get older, you sort of prioritize them, right?
Totally. Like the ones that feed you versus the ones that drain you. Yeah. And it's cool. It's forced me to find other ways of doing music too, you know, which are maybe a little bit more sustainable. You know,
that's right. Because some of those old
late night stuff.
those old models even don't work anymore for musicians. The same as yoga teachers. They're kind of in the same boat. Totally.
Yeah. It's like a whole new world. So you got to be creative and figure out what's actually going to work.
Well, the other thing is, you know, my wife's an artist, so we were looking at your paintings too. You do ink paintings that are pretty beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, that's another hobby. they're all hobbies.
But you know, they're different pursuits, things that have clearly brought you joy at one time or another.
Exactly. Yep. For me, it's all creativity. That's what's so interesting to me, you know. So whether it's through the lens of studying yoga and where, you know, energy and inspiration and creativity come from, or whether that's through music or whether that's through visual arts, to me, there's a common thread between all of those that I find so interesting. So it leads to many different avenues that sometimes.
And when did you first take interest in that? Well, actually, first of all, where are you right now? I don't even know where you are.
Right now, I am in Madison, Wisconsin. Okay. I used to live here. I recently moved, so I live in Minnesota now, or I'm based out of Minnesota, but I'm on the road quite a bit. But right now, I happen to be in Madison, Wisconsin.
All right. And I have a note that you came from the Midwest. Where did you grow up?
I'm originally from Duluth, Minnesota, which is where I live now. Actually, I moved back about a year ago. Which is, it's a really cool place. It's kind of, people don't realize because they think it's like north and kind of this small little place, but it's really beautiful. It's on Lake Superior, right on the greatest of the Great Lakes. So it's really beautiful. There's a lot of nature there, and it's kind of a nice pace of living there.
I got you. I know I made a move just a few years ago to slow my pace down.
Sure. So where are you?
I'm in Pennsylvania right now, in Easton, Pennsylvania, but I was in Brooklyn forever. And then I needed to switch that up, and I'm glad I did. I'm much better for it, I think.
yeah, I find that then I can go to like, New York or LA or some crazy place and really enjoy it, but I'm not like immersed in it all of the time.
Yeah, that's true. Recently, I was actually traveling. I was actually in Melbourne in Australia.
Oh, yeah.
And whenever I get to like a big city, like wherever it is that has that kind of real cosmopolitan, more fast-paced public transportation, I was like, oh, I know how to do this.
Yeah, exactly. You can kind of snap into that mode. Yeah. Here we go.
That's like I know what this is like. It's when I go to other places where it's more spread out and it's nature. That's when I don't know what the hell's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, you get so used to whatever it is.
Did you, growing up where you grew up, did you have any exposure to yoga early on? When did you first start to find your way to some of these things? Or was music and art the first creative outlets?
Yeah, music and art was definitely the first creative outlet. And I was pretty singularly focused specifically on violin when I was young. And even like through my undergrad, I was really focused on that pretty much exclusively. I liked music and I liked singing and I liked painting and drawing, but I was really into that. I took some yoga classes with my mom when I was a kid, not thinking much of it. Just she wanted to go to class. So, she took me along.
Do you remember what that was like? What your mom's yoga class was like?
I do. It was a kind of a late night, more mellow class, fireplace going. And I remember it being very still and quiet. And as a kid being like, why is everyone, just like
wanting to run all around?
Yeah. And it's funny, I actually reconnected recently with that teacher. And so he remembers like when I was a little kid and he remembers that too. And so we had a good laugh about that, like my perspective now versus I don't know how old I was, maybe like 10 or something. But I didn't have a lot of exposure to it until my early 20s again. And then I started practicing, at a local studio in Madison and just got really into it. I think I kind of have that music mind where like, I know if you do something and you want to be serious about it, you have to do it a lot.
Yeah. Practice.
Coming from a classical violin world, so I just got really dedicated to it and started practicing a lot. And, started cleaning the yoga studio so that I could practice for trade. And then one thing led to another.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes it makes a lot of, I think there's more to it than that probably, but it makes a lot of sense though, that even just the notion of practice and how like, there's no success or failure necessarily in practice. Practice is just practicing. And then like the more practicing you do, you the better you get at it.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. That's another like big curiosity of mine, which is why I think it doesn't necessarily matter sometimes the medium for me, whether it's yoga or whether it's painting or music, because I love how practice works. It's like, it's the one surefire thing in the world as far as I'm concerned. Like if you do something, you will get better at it. And I love that you can't skip to the end of that.
Yes.
There's only through.
I so totally agree and know what you're talking about. I jumped through like a couple different mediums before landing on yoga. Like I did theater and then I actually did a dance period.
Sure.
And then I had a short music period and then yoga became it. But there was definitely like I was doing the same stuff in some way through all of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it had to do with this process and inquiry. Like I always liked rehearsals more than I liked performances.
Yes, yeah, totally.
Not that I didn't have good performance experiences as well, but that it was always that time where you're just like in the studio with the wood floor and you're like using your body and you were like delving into yourself, into life. That's why I liked it.
That I 100% agree. That's what I like about it too. It's like, it's so raw and you can work on it for a half an hour or you can sit there and do nothing, but you're going to get drastically different results. And to like have that much that you can invest in it and then see what happens, to me is so fascinating.
Yeah. And yoga just felt like this like the purest form of it or something.
I totally agree.
Like this ancient sacred, like they've been doing it forever. Human beings have been using this as the vehicle for it.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Because it brings up all of those barriers in your mind, you know, and then like, because I think for me, at least with music, it's easy to say, well, this piece of music is hard, or this teacher isn't a good fit, or, you know, this practice room is too hot. You know, like it's like this so easy to make up all of those excuses in the mind. And then when there's just you and your body, it becomes less and less easy to go down that road. I think for me, it's like you just realize, no, it just is what it is. Either you do it or you don't.
And it was very, for me, like I didn't have to perform for anybody. It wasn't about any kind of approval from anybody. It's like my own approval.
Totally. I think that's the perfect way to put it. Yeah, exactly. There's nothing else for it except you doing it.
Yeah, just you, and what's there is you.
Right, for good and for bad.
All of it, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, what was that center that you started going to? Where was that, in Madison, or where was that?
Madison, Wisconsin. Yeah, Inner Fire Yoga.
And what was going on there? What sort of yoga practice was happening there? Was it like what you did with your mom with the fireplace, or was that more when things had gotten like yoga center-y? Yeah,
it had gotten a bit yoga center-y. It's a really lovely studio still, and it's been around for a while. So it started before kind of the really big boom of studios. Mm-hmm. So it started as Bikram Yoga Madison. And by the time that I started practicing there, they had the Bikram class, but they also had some vinyasa classes and some yin classes, sort of already a mix. And that was pretty early in terms of the Bikram community to have a studio that had already sort of branched out into other styles.
Was that before all kinds of the stuff came out and everything, and there was all so they were already, that's kind of breaking a rule. You really weren't supposed to do that. You're supposed to be dedicated.
You weren't supposed to do that. No, you weren't supposed to do that. And they were very early, I think one of the first to do that. And I think it was just kind of the community that Madison was. The owner, Marit, who's a really lovely woman, she just felt that she needed to offer some other things. And so I think that was pretty transformative for me, though I didn't realize it at the time, was that I was immersed in other things, not just the Bikram world. But that is mostly what I practiced. I practiced a Bikram class. There were still the days of the 30-day challenge where you do the Bikram class every day for 30 days. And
straight 26 and 2, right?
Yeah, straight 90 minutes, 26 and 2, the hot room. Very humbling experience. So, I was like, well, I'll do a challenge. You know, there were people at the studio doing it. And then you get to day 31 and you're like, well, I guess I'll just go to class again. You know, like, why would I stop at this point? And so I practiced pretty exclusively, the Bikram class, Bikram yoga, for about 2 years, probably.
And what are you? I'm sorry to jump in, but what are you doing when you're not taking class at that time? Are you in school? Are you working?
Yeah, I was working as a musician. Okay. So like a freelance performing musician.
All right.
And teaching some music. I was teaching high school girls a cappella, of all things. And so kind of making it work, just
grinding it out.
Yeah. Well, but yeah, like I said, at that point, I was a cleaner at the studio, which made it possible to practice all the time, and now I look back on that and I was like, that was awesome. I'd kind of like to go back to that. So simple.
Yeah. The karma yoga days.
Yeah. It's like you just sweep and practice. It's actually very, very yogic, I think.
All right. So that goes on for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Does that, I have a note here that you have Shivananda training. Where does it go from there? Like, where does your yoga practice go from there?
It's been kind of a long journey since then. So after a couple of years of doing that, I wanted to go do a teacher training, my partner and I, Scott, and we decided to go study with Tony Sanchez, who was a student of Bikram's in the early 70s. At the time, he was teaching in Mexico. And he was kind of praised in the book Hellbent by Benjamin Lohr.
Yeah, I talked with him. He was on the show. We talked about him specifically.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So we decided to go study with Tony Sanchez, and we had a really positive experience there. Ended up studying with him a couple times. But while we were there, the first time we met Jerome Armstrong, who's been doing all this research. And so, we didn't think much of it at that point, but we, just met each other, hung out a bit. And then a couple months later, we decided to work on some practice manuals, Scott and I. So these, what we call the Ghosh Yoga practice manuals, which are, like how to do postures specifically from Ghosh tradition. And we talked with Jerome about that, and he's like, yeah, I think that's a cool idea. We were kind of on the fence whether that was appropriate to do or whether we wanted to do it. But he kind of encouraged us to do that. And then a little bit after that, I think he had it in his head that we were working on some books. He found this manuscript from Buddha Bose from the 1930s that had been completely lost, never published, like talk about needle in the haystack, gold mine type of find.
Mm-hmm. He told us a story of discovering it from the guy who had it, and he had to prove that he was worthy to look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Quite a story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
totally. And so that kind of, so he asked if Scott and I wanted to help him publish that, and we were like, yeah, that's so cool. We were just really happy to be on board with the project. And he asked, so the stipulation basically from the guy that had the manuscript was, you can publish this, but you need to check with the family of Buddha Bose if they're around and if this is appropriate to publish it. And so we went to India, and Jerome's like, do you guys want to go with? And he was like, we said, yeah. We thought it was
so were you on that trip with him that he told us about? Oh, yeah, you traveled with him. I didn't know that. Oh, cool.
Yep. Yeah, so it was the three of us. Mm-hmm. Scott, Lamps, myself, and Jerome. Yeah.
Okay. So you were sort of there for that background on his kind of fantastic book, Calcutta Yoga, which we talked about.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, I helped him edit that book.
Okay, cool.
For the kind of couple years leading up to when it was finished. Yeah, so I've been in the weeds with him quite a bit the last few years.
I see. So you formed relationships to the family alongside him with that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we met specifically Bishnu Ghosh's granddaughter, Muktamala Mitra, who runs Ghosh's College in Calcutta. And Jerome is a man of big ideas. And so he was like, hey, can we come and do a training here? And I didn't really think much of it, that I honestly thought this was my once in a lifetime chance to go to India. So that's all I had in my mind. But she wanted to do a training. She wanted to have Westerners come and do a training. And so we ended up putting that together and just putting it out there hey, is anybody interested? And people started signing up. And then so all of a sudden I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm kind of the link between all the people that are signing up from Western culture and this school in India. So I better go so I know what the deal is, and I can be there to help people if they have questions. And so I've become really close with Muktamala especially. And since that training, I have helped her put on maybe 8 or 9 trainings or something. So I help get people over to Calcutta and get settled in and kind of connect the two worlds.
Well, it's so interesting to hear that, because I know I've talked to a lot of different people who at one time or another have benefited from a 26 and 2 class.
Yeah.
But are almost a little embarrassed they don't want to say, I like Bikram yoga. For obvious reasons. So I think people discovering Ghosh yoga has been an outlet for a lot of people who gravitated towards that type of practice. Because that is sort of its roots.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And there's been so many things about the last couple of years of this work that have been just really kind of fortuitous. I mean, when we started doing this, it was just as there were, some not so good news coming out about what was going on. And that opened people's minds up to the fact that they could believe in something else. And I think had that news not broken at that time, people would not be very interested or accepting of this research because, Bikram really has said that his yoga is his yoga and that's what you should follow.
But when you talk to people when you talk to people who are on the inside track, people like Tony Sanchez or whatever, and not that I've spoken to him, people who took the time to look into it knew where he got his stuff from.
Right.
Yeah. And, it's just interesting to me also, it seems like it's not even just about Bikram. I think that in general, a lot of what was sort of the established narratives around yoga in terms of how we came to learn about it in our modern times as Westerners, a lot of that has been being reevaluated, and even with all the different scholarship happening. So the idea that sort of the Ghosh yoga tradition, and I talked with Jerome about this, sort of had like those weird twists of fate that made it so that we didn't hear about Buddha Bose the same way we heard about Krishnamacharya.
Exactly.
And so there was almost there was like another narrative that hadn't been heard. So I don't know, just from my own experience of being someone who's just generally interested to know about all these different yogas.
Right.
It was an interesting thing. So I think all of that leads to people just having a greater interest in knowing more about other types of practices and other traditions that existed.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's really, it's so rich. I mean, there's so much. And that's what's really perpetuated the work that I've been doing along with Jerome and Scott the last couple of years, because it started as, let's just publish the Buddha Bose manuscript. And, we all legitimately thought that was all we were going to do and then move on, go back to our lives. But through working on that book, we met the nephew of Gauri Shankar Mukherjee, who was a student of Bishnu Ghosh in the 1960s. His book was out of print. Nobody knew about it, et cetera, et cetera. The same type of story. And then we're like, well, we can't let this go unpublished. This is important. And Gauri Shankar was actually a doctor. He was trained in Germany. And so he had a very medical background and perspective on the postures and used a lot of research to support the claims that he was making in his book. So we thought, well, this is really important to get this out there. And so it's just one thing leads to the next. And you realize that, like you say, these threads there are many of them and they're important. And we might only know about one of them now, but it doesn't mean there aren't other stories out there.
Well, yeah. And one of those threads that you just touched on that I want to talk about is this idea of prescriptive yoga.
Yeah.
But before we talk about that, though, I am kind of just curious to know a little bit about your experience, because people who devote themselves to the kind of work that you're doing, particularly when it's a particular type of yoga, usually have had, as Jerome shared with me, like their own personal experiences with that practice, and that's what makes them passionate about it.
Yeah.
And I did mention, I had this other note of you having other types of training, like Shivananda yoga. Yes. Is that right? So I'm just kind of curious about your own process of practice and what your experience has been and how it is that you've landed on the practice that you're doing now and why, maybe.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I studied with Tony Sanchez, and then not too long after that, I did the prescriptive yoga training myself at Ghosh's College. That really got me interested in even more in Calcutta, in the yoga that comes from that region, because you could see how Bikram yoga came out of it, but wasn't the whole story, and there was more to it. And then a few years after that, I did a forest yoga training, which really, I really love how the forest yoga teachers teach, how they actually communicate the postures and the practices. And there's so much strength and power in forest yoga. And so I felt that really complemented Ghosh yoga, which is a pretty strong practice, but maybe not necessarily focused on effective teaching. So I was really interested in the forest yoga system for that. And then I guess most recently, I lived at the Shivananda Yoga Ashram in the Bahamas for a while, and I did an advanced training there. And that for me kind of tied all of what I had done so far together, because that was a really mental and spiritual focused training. A lot about, 2 meditations a day, an hour of pranayama starting at 5 a.m, less physical and far more study of how the mind works, and the more detailed practices of yoga, the breathing practices and the mental practices. And that, for me, like I said, kind of put the whole package together, if you want to call it that, because the Ghosh system is really physical. It comes from weightlifting and it comes from muscle control and these really kind of male-dominated physical practices from the early 1900s, and which is great. It really strengthens the body. It has this perspective of the therapeutics and how you can actually take something, a part of your body or an issue that you're having, and use yoga to work on that. But it doesn't always include the mind and the deeper breathing practices. And so the Shivananda training was really powerful for me in that way, because it shifted, how I was thinking of it, which was pretty physical, to, wow, there's so many breathing practices. There's so many mental practices, really coming to realize all the ways, well, not all the ways, it's still a practice for me, but starting to realize the ways in which your mind, dictates your reality, and whether or not that is actually the reality that you want to be living in. Mm-hmm. And so the combination of that has been really interesting to me.
Well, I can relate to that process. I certainly was more focused on forms and being able to do some things with my body.
Yeah.
At some point, though, as it seems like with you, you need to fill it out. Like there needs to be more to it than that.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, it just sort of becomes like mediocre gymnastics.
I love that. It's totally the case. Yeah, it's like you start, for me, I started getting a little hints of injuries and stretching pretty far, worrying about balancing on my hands and stuff. And it stopped feeling like this was taking me deeper in a way. It started feeling like it was just taking me in a direction. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it seemed a little bit empty at a certain point.
Mm-hmm. Me too. I remember getting praised for doing a handstand demonstration and then walking home and just feeling like shit, being like, yes, so I can do a handstand, but I still feel terrible. Like that can't be it. It's got to be more to it than that.
Exactly. Right. It's like, somehow this isn't working. This isn't actually getting me where I thought I was going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.